Hi friends, it's Lauren. Thanks for joining me in my craft room today. I'm grateful to have you here. I'm going to be using the December 2023 Clear Stamp and Die Club of the month. And I'm also going to be using those Essential Modern Oval dies that I've been dying to use. If you saw my other video for the clubs this month, my Better Press plate of the month, you know that I was really trying to sneak in these ovals, and I'm going to use them on today's project. So I'm making sure I pick the oval that will fit nicely with my love die. I'm going to run the die through my die cut machine with some brown ink, and that's because for some reason I thought that the love stamp was going to be a little bit more, I usually call it loosey-goosey, which I know is not a very technical term, but I wasn't sure if the parts of the L and the E and the V were going to be kind of hard to keep straight, but it's actually one nice big stamp. You can see right here in the video in the top right corner that the stamp is actually very nice. There's no loosey-goosey parts to my stamp. So I definitely could have done the stamping before the die cutting. But I was worried that when I stamped it that the die would not line up well, because I didn't get the stamp like perfectly as it's intended to run through the die cut, or run with the die cut to cut it out. So I started with die cutting at first because that's what I do when I'm worried about loosey-goosey stamps. But as you can see here, there are no issues. So I definitely could have stamped it first. But regardless, we are here and we're going to stamp the Love stamp from the December 2023 Clear Stamp of the Month. And I'm going to stamp it onto my brown die cut piece, just making sure that the die cut fits nicely in that window that I die cut it out of. And then I will go ahead and stamp it with some clear embossing ink. So I'm going to actually make sure that I have some anti-static powder before I stamp it down. So I forgot before I added the ink, but no worries. So I went ahead and stamped it twice to make sure I had good coverage. And I'm going to use some Brutus Monroe rose gold embossing powder with my Brutus Monroe embossing ink. There is a little piece in between the O and the E that doesn't have any ink, so I'm going to use my reverse tweezers to hold that piece of cardstock while I add the embossing powder, make sure I have good coverage and that my stamp is completely covered with that powder. And then I'll use my heat gun to melt that embossing powder down, and I will let it cool, set it to the side and let it cool. I love rose gold with brown and craft. I just think it's so pretty, complements each other really well. So while that's cooling down, I'm going to move on to the next step, which is going to be die cutting and embossing with my embossing folder, a piece of dark pink cardstock. This is the Dahlia Color Essentials cardstock from Spellbinders, and I'm going to run it through with my oval die first. So just run that through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine. I have the black one that is a collaboration with scrapbook.com, and I love the pink plates that it comes with, and I'm running it through with my magic mat. So I have that oval shape to create a panel for my love to sit on when I get to that step. I also am going to be using my Corrugated 3D embossing folder, so I'm working on getting my sandwich set up for that. And because I'm using a 3D embossing powder, I did spray my cardstock with a little bit of water just to help make sure that it will run through my sandwich and my machine without cracking or breaking the paper. There is a little bit of cracking, I guess you could say, but I don't mind it. It just makes it a little more rustic and gives it more interest, in my opinion. So I ran that through with the proper sandwich for a 3D embossing folder, and there you can see that corrugated design just adds some interest to my background. I'm going to ink up along the edges of this oval piece, so I grabbed some confetti pink ink. This is from scrapbook.com, and a blending brush, and I'm just going to go around the whole oval and just add some ink to give it a little bit of depth and dimension, and leave the center of it lighter. So once I have that covered how I like it, I'll go ahead and move on to the next step. Of course, I need to clean up my desk first, otherwise I'll get pink ink everywhere. And the next step is to add a little bit of metallic watercolor. This is the Opal Colors Pigments. It's a really pretty subtle opal rainbow, and I'm going with the pink or the red of the colors. I know it's kind of hard to see on camera, but it does have a nice subtle pink shine when it dries. I'm going to die cut 2 more pieces of brown cardstock with my Love die, and later on I'll glue all 3 of those layers together so there's some stability when I add that sentiment to my oval later on in this video. I'm going to continue on with stamping. So I have some lighter pink cardstock, and I'm going to stamp my hearts from the stamp set on there. There's 3 different heart shapes. I'm going to stamp all 3 of these twice. So I'm going to line them up in my MISTI so I can just shift my paper and stamp more. So I am stamping them with the same pink ink, the Confetti pink hybrid ink pad from scrapbook.com, and again stamping those twice. I do stamp them each, like I layer ink I think 2 times to make sure there's a nice clean crisp image. And then I grabbed some light brown cardstock. You could use craft. I think that would be really pretty with this card. Again, I love browns and pinks together. And I stamped the 2 different size kind of leaf design 3 times. So I have 6 hearts and 6 of the different kind of leafy vine images. I'm going to use their coordinating dies to cut them out. So I'm going to grab my yellow tape so I can keep those dies in place while I run it through my die cut machine. So getting all of those hearts lined up as well as the leafy images, and I'll run that through my die cutting machine a few times to get all of those images cut out. Once I have them all, I can now move on to the next step, which is starting to build our card together. I'm going to go ahead and glue those 3 love sentiment layers together. So I'm going to use liquid glue, and then I'll work on kind of figuring out how I want my different images to go around my sentiment. So I let my glue sit out too long, so I had to use my stainless steel pin to get it going again. And then again, gluing all 3 of those layers together, it just gives it some nice stability and thickens it up for more dimension, so I don't have to use up all of my foam strips behind my sentiment to attach it to that oval. I'm kind of playing around with my images to add in around my sentiment, but before I get too far ahead, I'm going to go ahead and cut my card base. I'm going to use a kind of cream color this time. Normally, I'm an avid white card base user, but I'm going to use a cream cardstock this time. So I'll go ahead and score it at 5.5 and then cut it at 4.25. So I have 2 top folding card bases, one for this card and one for the future. Go ahead and reinforce that score line. I'm going to grab some more cream cardstock to cut out my second half of my sentiment in just a little bit, but I'll go ahead and add my oval to my card base. I'm going to use some foam adhesive to add it. So I'm using my 2-inch foam adhesive from scrapbook.com. I put 1 big piece in the middle and then trim more pieces to fit around the oval. And I will adhere that to the center on the front of my card base. So I went with cream for my background this time because I am using, pinks and browns together, and I thought cream is just another shade of brown and they look so nice together. I'm trying to decide on what I want my sentiment to be. I didn't want to do a Valentine's Day card, although obviously any of these sentiments could be easily adapted to a Valentine's Day card, but I wanted to make kind of a general love card. So I'm using the My Heart Is Yours sentiment. It is smaller than the rectangle die because it's intended to fit the longest one. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp on a piece of cream cardstock. This is the same cream cream cardstock. I just cut a scrap piece and I'll use my MISTI to get that stamped onto that piece. So I'll go ahead and line it up, and I'm going to grab that brown ink that I used earlier to stamp my images, which is the cinnamon ink pad from scrapbook.com, and I stamped my sentiment onto that cream cardstock. I'm going to grab that coordinating die, the strip die for the stamp set, and I'm going to line it up so it's a little bit closer to the right side of the die. So I'm going to use this die twice to cut out my sentiment. So I want it to be snug against the right side. I kind of wish I was not quite as snug, but that's okay. And so I ran that through my die cut machine, and then I'm going to line up the die again, and this time kind of sliding it down so it's now snug on the left side, so next to that M. And I will use that yellow tape again to keep that lined up. I want to make sure that the edges of my die line up with the edges of what's already been die cut, so I'll just throw on a little bit more yellow tape on the back side as well. I ran that through my die cut machine just a little bit so I could cut that edge next to the M, and now I have a beautifully cut sentiment strip with the same die, but it's a little smaller to fit around my sentiment. So now I can finally work on my layout. So I know I want my sentiment, the My Heart Is Yours, to go across the center of my card and across the love. So I played around with the hearts and the leafy pieces until I got it kind of laid out how I think it would look really nice on the card. I have some that I will glue directly to the card base, some that I will glue behind the letters on top of the pink oval. So once I'm happy, I will just pick up one piece at a time. It takes me a little time, but I'm just, I really liked the layout and I wanted to make sure I glued it down just as I had it. So I'll use my jewel picker and my tweezers to help me get those pieces glued and then attached exactly where I pick them up. And once all of them are glued down, I have one more heart here, I'll go ahead and then glue down the love sentiment. I'm going to add plenty of liquid adhesive on the back side because I do have lots of texture on that oval piece as it was embossed. So I'm going to add lots of liquid glue to the back side and make sure I give it plenty of time to adhere to that corrugated pink oval. So just, pressing it. I edited out how long I had my hands on top of it, but I did let it sit for a little while. And then finally, I'll add some liquid glue to my sentiment strip and get that adhered. I almost dropped it. Well, I did drop it, but I almost, had glue where I didn't want it, but luckily it didn't fall glue side down. And I'm gluing that, trying to use the grid to get it centered as best as I can onto the card. I think it turned out so pretty, so let me clean up my desk, but of course, if you know me, I got to add a little bit of something shiny, I guess. This is a gloss pops of color, so it's a subtle shine, it's a glossy shine, and I'm using the color Iced Mocha to add in some little pops of color around the outside of the oval, as well as adding some to the leaves within the design of my clear stamped images. So I keep going. I have no rhyme or reason to how I add them. I just add them as I like them. I try to add small dots, bigger dots, create a nice little mixture. Sometimes I go a little too crazy, but I think this time I added a lot, but I think it looks really nice. I'll go ahead and tap on the inside of my card base so I can dome out those pops of color. I prefer them to look a little bit more like enamel dots rather than Hershey Kisses. So that's what I do to flatten them up. I was creating in dusk, so I turned on my lights so that way you could see a nice clean view of a final look of my card. I hope that you like my take using the clear stamp of the month from Spellbinders. I will have that club linked down below. It comes just as a clear stamp, or you could do the clear stamp and die, so I'll have those linked down below, as well as a link to all the Spellbinders clubs. But I hope you'd like my take on this month's stamp set. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!